Hey, good morning. Welcome to March, I'm going to say 17th. Yep, I'm right. So hey, guess what? It took me about 65 hours, but I finally did it. Let me turn this fucking music off. Jesus, it's distracting. I beat it. I finally beat it. Like I said, 65 hours into this bad bitch, and did I like it? It's hard to say because I'm mixed, sort of. Um, I'll save the big thing for last, I guess. Let me just start off by saying the sound department gets a 1 out of 1. It does, for a couple reasons. The voice acting is pretty cool. Pretty much most of the game is voice, which is something you don't see a lot. Like, I guess some things can't be voiced, obviously, but pretty much anything relating to the main story or side quests is voiced, which means main characters and the villains are all voiced, which is cool. Now, the music is... There's a lot of good songs, let's just put it that way. There's a couple songs that you kind of tune out after a while. But that's the cool thing about this game, is it gives you the option to turn off music, turn off sound, and turn off voices. So that's the way it should always be. This is what it should be in every game. This is an innovation. It shouldn't even be considered an innovation, but it's something that has been in games for like years now. That should be in every game. And believe it or not, there are some games that do not feature that, and that's bullshit. Now, another cool thing about the sound department is they actually give you the Japanese voices too. So if you are in weeaboo mode and you're just like, you know what, I don't really feel like having like these English voice actors on, let me go turn on Japanese, which is cool. Now, let's jump into gameplay, because story is like my biggest thing that I want to talk about in this game. Gameplay is obviously, if you ever heard about Bravely Default, it's being touted as the true successor to Final Fantasy. It's essentially a Final Fantasy game, and it is. Through and through, it's a Final Fantasy game. You know, you could throw this right alongside Final Fantasy, like, this could be Final Fantasy X. You know, right before that, like, next-gen leap from PS1 to PS2, you could easily have put this in there with the PS1 games, and you wouldn't. This is Final Fantasy X. You know, it's just very, very Final Fantasy. Through the gameplay mechanics, to the way the story works, to just the lore and the gameplay mechanics, like, it's very Final Fantasy. That goes through, like, the items. You know, this game has potions and elixirs and Phoenix Downs, and there is no, like, chocobos or obvious throws to Final Fantasy, aside from the job system and the items and stuff like that, but you can tell it's a Final Fantasy game. Alright, so where do we start with the gameplay? I guess we can start with the basics. Basically, this game uses a chapter system, so I think it's kind of interesting the way the game works, because you technically have 5 real chapters, and then all of a sudden you have 2 different endings you can work towards. And basically you can get to I think it's chapter 6 is when you make the decision as to beat the game in chapter 7, or if you want to go to the next chapter, which is essentially just an extra dungeon and maybe a couple boss fights more. But it lets you experience both endings and all that, so it's good. But basically what happens is every chapter you get these things called asterisks, which are essentially just job crystals. If you've played Final Fantasy V, it's very similar to that. You beat bosses, and then usually after saving crystals and stuff, you get more jobs. Jobs are being classes or roles, if you don't know. So you start off very basic, like every Final Fantasy game. You get like the black mage, you get the monk, you get the white mage, and you start off with like a basic class. And as you progress through the game, you do these. It's really cool, actually. On the mini map, you'll see main quests and side quests, and if you do side quests, those basically always guarantee you a new job. So they do a really good job of side quests. Normally side quests are very bullshit, like, hey, go over there, kill this guy. or go do something, of minimalistic tasking. And this game is just like straight up, let's go like explore this world. Let's teach you a little bit about this world. Let's teach you about the characters and their like relations. And the bad guys in this game are all pretty much psychotic to an extent. That's the best way to describe them. A lot of them are very like hell-bent on destruction. So for you, like these characters, like teenagers, like early adults, to be like traveling the world, like trying to save the world and having to kill people and actually kill them. This isn't like Pokemon where you're like, oh, I defeated you, or I fainted, or I passed out, or I beat you up. And no, like they actually die. These characters like legit die, which is cool. But you beat these characters, you get jobs, you travel the world. It's very basic like JRPG. You have an overworld, you have an airship and a boat, and you travel the world from, I think there's 5 continents, 4 or 5 continents, and each continent has towns and stuff you can visit. It's pretty basic as it comes to that. But where the game excels is with the job system. And you're always leveling up new jobs, and then once like let's say you leveled up your ninja class to level 5, and then you were like, alright, let me go over to my knight class, but let me take that level 5 ninja as a secondary job. That way I have the abilities of my ninja, but I also have my knight abilities that I'm leveling up too. So it's a really interesting system where, I don't know, you can combine jobs, and it's pretty cool the way it works out. Like you get certain classes that are obviously paired to be together. Like you're gonna always want to have a mage in your party, so you're always gonna have somebody in there with a white mage as a secondary class, or maybe black mage as a second class, and then you get like all these other classes that play into those. It's a cool system, no doubt. What's interesting though, this game tries to, I guess, innovate on the JRPG genre with a couple things. I guess you'd call them gimmicks, sort of. One thing is that you take your 3DS friends, right, and it links them onto your friends list in the game. Now let's say you added Frazzleberry to your friends list, and you equipped me to one of your characters. My character stats would override your character stats. So like let's say your Ring a Bell was a level 5 black mage. Well, when you load up when you link me to Ring a Bell would have a level 14 black mage abilities now. His stats wouldn't be any better, but he would have access to the later job abilities, which is a really cool system. So if you want to add me, by the way, go ahead and add me. Just leave a comment and I'll send you my friend code. But if this was a good thing, I'm not gonna rant into no. Fuck, you should be able to just type in Frazzleberry and add me, but you can't. But that's pretty cool. You also get one ability from that person. So like, let's say I save, because basically what happens is you save a move. Let's say you're getting ready to do a move. You're like, oh, I know this move's gonna do a lot of damage. Let me hit save. That way, once you do that move saves to your Nintendo profile or whatever. So when you added me, you would be able to use that ability once, which is a pretty cool system. It's very gimmicky though. Somebody told me that it refreshes every 24 hours. So like, let's say you use my ability once, you could use it again the next day, then the next day. It didn't work like that for me. I've been playing this game for almost a month, probably over a month, and none of those abilities ever refreshed. Another thing about gameplay is you're also rebuilding a village that gets destroyed in the game. It's an interesting idea, but I had everything rebuilt by like midpoint of the game. The idea is that basically every time you street pass somebody or add somebody to your friends list, or you wait 24 hours, you get villagers added to your town. Your villagers can be used to build portions of your city. So you'd be building an armory, an item store, accessory store, and the faster you build these things up, the earlier you have better gear in the game. So you build that weapon store faster, you're gonna have access to decent weapons, stuff like that. It's an interesting idea, but it wasn't executed very well. I mean, really, the accessory shop and the special abilities were the only thing that was worth it. A couple items were okay early on in the game, but that's basically the gist of gameplay. It's very Final Fantasy, very JRPG. You travel the world beating bosses, trying to save these 4 crystals. later on they introduce a weird, I guess, replay mechanic, without going into spoilers. So there's, I don't know. I give the gameplay a 1 out of 1 too. It's definitely a highlight in this game for sure. Now this is the mixed area for me, story, because on one hand, it's awesome. You know, this is a teen-rated game. You know, it earns its T rating, and that's something a lot of Nintendo games don't do. So death is prominent. You see death, and it's talked about in this game. There's a lot of depressing moments, I guess you could take them on as. There's just a lot of like loss and a lot of like darkness to the story. It's got a nice tone to it, even though it is a little lighthearted sometimes. Basic idea of the story is 4 characters come together, and you're trying to save these 4 crystals that are basically being tainted by darkness, and you have to go and purify them to save the world. And the game goes fucking nuts around chapter 5. I've heard a lot of reviews of people saying that, yeah, you can see these like plot twists coming, and you can see who the real bad guy is starting to come into play later on. And it is true, which kind of sucks, but at the same time, I thought if you look deeper into the story, it starts to get pretty interesting. You know, what the hell was the God Realm called? Shit, I just beat the game and I can't remember the name. But basically, I don't know. Let me just say Ring-a-Bell is a very interesting character. Tiz has something inside of him that they should have really discussed more on. This game, they leave it open, and I don't know. It leaves a weird taste in my tongue. But I liked it a lot. I don't know. I like how these side quests. The side quests really appeal to me. I love finding out these bosses and fighting them. You know. It's really cool. And then you take on their job as like a reward for killing these people. It's cool. You know, the sage, you find out like how the sage is actually the one manufacturing all these asterisks and these jobs to like exploit the like the religious like cults and shit, and the vampire, like there's just so many things that come into this game that are really cool, and I like it. So that's where I'm torn, because on one hand you've got this really interesting story and you've got interesting things, but then it's sort of, I don't want to say generic, but it's been done before. It's very, I guess, standard. You know, good guys are gonna win. I mean, there's sacrifice and stuff along the way, but a lot of stuff does too. It's a little obvious at some points, but at the same time, there's a lot of like, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about this. Let's just say it's entertaining. That's the best way to describe it. Like, there's not a point where you're just like skip cutscenes. I mean, there are a couple parts where you will like read the text and skip, instead of like listening to the voices, because the voices carry on too long. I don't know what I'm talking about anymore. I'm very torn. I don't want to say this game's a 3 out of 3, because that means it's like a perfect game. So I will say it's a 2 out of 5. The story could have been slightly better. But it's still a good story. It's not a bad story, don't get me wrong. So I give story a 0.5 or a 0, yeah, a 1, no, 0.5 out of 1. That's Bravely Default. This is a long ass fucking video. I really like the game a lot, and like I said, I spent over 60 hours on it, so this game's been taking up a large chunk of my time. It's a very good RPG if you're looking for like a 3DS RPG or just something like a throwback. It's like the perfect throwback JRPG. So if you like Final Fantasy, this is probably a must get if you have a 3DS. It's very fun. I liked it. I'm gonna finish this milkshake because it's looking really good. Okay, goodbye.